Sinking. I don't really have a witty lead into this one, it's just a good effect. As far as the 7 main statuses go, Sinking is easily the strongest inherently, given that it shuts down all but one of the current bosses with SP and averages out to roughly equal to Rupture on those without. As per usual, I'll go through and release date, and both assume uptime 4 and a full 7s in a team. But for this one, I'm also going to need to start with a choice. Most teams, hell, every non-sinking team, can choose to just not run their best member. You can play Bleed without Ring Yi, Tremor without Hong, and Poise without the full stop duo. Sinking is the exception. If you play Sinking, you need to pick one of the 2 good Isang Sinking IDs. I'll still discuss Daichi E later though. Leading with the earlier of the 2, Spicebush is really showing his age. For no discernible reason, he's a self-tremor ID, with a single coin power conditional on the S2, a passive that barely helps him, and a focus on next turn sinking. While not a strict downside, mostly due to it letting him set up a stack if he goes first early, it doesn't help him out to actually get a slight 3 or less count stack going. He'll be far more likely to eat the whole thing than actually sustain it. To top all the issues off, his rolls are subpar given the lack of any conditions outside of the S2. Despite all that, he's still better than not running him, and that's for 2 main reasons. First, Sinking Deluge. For a long while this was the only way to turn Sinking into HP damage on enemies with SP, and given that the Kanto right after featured Ahab, good luck sinking her down with the IDs you had back then. I wouldn't give a single glance at this line. If your 18 roll nuke skill lost the clash, you have far bigger issues than 20 SP loss. As for the Deluge itself, it's not as good as it was back then. Don't misunderstand me though, it is a great source of damage, but given how many enemies have HP gates, you're far more likely to eat the whole stack in exchange for a phase swap, as opposed to a kill. Oh, and he has attack weight on the S2? Despite being the first ID with weight, it almost never comes up. Earliest you can trigger it is turn 3, which requires an S1 and an S3, oh, in any order, at which point you drain 3 count for a 6-1 stack next turn. Bonus points for an entirely unique wording on its weight gain conditional though. The only other ID with anything remotely similar is Autis, and at least she has the excuse of setting weight being easier to read than gain X minus 1 attack weight. Speaking of warp IDs, Solemn Lament E is the alternative option, and it's not hard to see why I, and pretty much everyone else playing Sinking, prefers him. Firstly, he has actual rolls. A 12-16-16 is a notable improvement, only made better by multiple conditions that let him clash at 15, 21, 28, assuming he's got the majority of his ammo and a 10-ish sinking stack. As for that stack, all of his skills have some amount of sinking count on clash win, with his S1 being count neutral, while the other 2 are merely -1. His passives are odd. The first is just a description of 2 of his unique statuses, while the second is a mostly free source of haste, while also slightly helping in unfocused encounters. As for his way of turning sinking to damage, it's a little more complex. Butterfly is an absurdly good debuff, letting every single sinking ID get a bit of SP on hit, and inflict a pretty easy 30 gloom damage on every hit. Now, for those Rupture or Tremor players, 30 might not sound that impressive, but consider that it's also still dealing SP damage, which outside of exactly one enemy, cripples enemy clashing. The effect's only more pronounced against SP-less enemies, who take an extra 15 from Butterfly. While high gloom resistance can hurt sinking damage, enemy resistances average out to 1x, as much as Rupture players cope about true damage. Now, there is one aspect both of these IDs share, but it's not going to be obvious why it's so good for a while. Bygone Daisy probably reads like a fine side grade to his base ego, trading the unconditional bind and the entirety of the attack power down and haste for a relevant passive, weight, a higher roll, and some decent sinking potency infliction. But the real source isn't something you'd likely get just by reading, so I'll explain it later when it comes up. The last thing I'll say for now is that the corrosion is notably worse and generally shouldn't be touched. It should be pretty obvious which of the 2 you should use, but you can get away with either. Solemn is better, but not by that much. If you already have a fully invested Spice Bush, or simply lack Solemn entirely, you can easily get away with Spice, and just have to deal with timing on the S3 for him. Now, with that opener out of the way, oh god, I wrote 7 paragraphs as an opener, I can get into some real garbage, because Sinking had by far the worst launch of any of the main 7. For obvious reasons, no base IDs will be mentioned, which means I get to start with G Corp Autis. Before Uptide 4, all the Sinking she had was 5 on the skill 3. That's it. No conditionals relating to Sinking, no ego that mentioned it, nothing in her passive or support. Uptide 4 decided to salvage her by giving her 2 coin power on the single coin skill 1, and 4 Sinking potency on her S3 if it heads hits. There's nothing for me to mention. If you want a Sinking Autis 00 ID, I prefer you use Ring over this absolute void of an ID. Have you read her Upside story? R-Corp-ish is a better Sinking ID than G-Corp, but still has no relevance to a modern Sinking team, and even going for as bare bones a team as possible, she had 42 days where you could play Sinking and still consider her. She's not bad though, honestly, just not really synergistic with Sinking. All of her skills, barring the evade, apply Sinking, what a high bar to clear, and her passive is a pretty nice Gloom synergy. I'd spend more time talking about her, how Uptide 4 gave her the keys to the goddamn kingdom, and how she's got several notable Sinking ego, but she also has another Sinking ID right after I discuss the punching bag. Ah, Sunshower Heath, what a unique ID you are. Self-Sinking still hasn't been used by anyone else, we didn't get a negative coin ID for over 2 years after you, and you were the first ID post-launch to have no home at all. How fitting you're canonically homeless. I could spend more time bullying him, but really the joke is old. We all know he's trash, we all know he has a better Sinking, Rupture and Tremor ID, and there's just no point to the guy. Going into a little more detail though, his rolls are, as per his gimmick, bad. Being built around clash-lose effects has never been a great design choice, and being done before Unbreakables just makes it worse. Honestly, the part I most want to mention is something I've not seen anyone else mention, that being Drifting Fox, and how all 3 Sun Showers, both Ego and the ID, have nearly nothing in common with themselves or it. Heath is honestly the closest to the Abno. He's got Rupture, Sinking and SP Drain, but even then he's pretty off base. Drifting Fox is mostly Sloth Gluttony, with all of its skills being Pierce or Slash. Heath is Envy, Gloom, Sloth, Wrath, is mostly Blunt, with the counter on S3 being Pierce, and has Paralyze, Fragile and a random Tremor Burst. Moving over to Autis, and her Sunshower is closer in some ways, being a Gluttony Pierce skill, still having Sinking and having a cost exclusively of the Fox's sins, but then for some reason it has Poise, still has that goddamn Tremor Burst, on crit might I add, and despite both of the Fox's Glut skills being Slash and Rupture, this one is, as mentioned just before, Sinking and Pierce. The big ego of the season, Sunshower for E, is nothing like Drifting at all. The skill it's supposed to mirror, Cries Seeking Something, is a Gloom skill, and instead of caring about Sinking at all, it's a Sloth synergy piece? Season 2 was a massive mess, and it's a miracle that Canto 4 was that good, all things considered. Now, where was I? Skipping over Spicebush, we're back to Ishmael, and our first actually count positive ID. Molar Ishmael is a product of her time, given the absurd passive that PM would never make today, and followed up with rolls on par with double O's from the same time. It's probably best leading with the passive. Simply put, if the target has 2 or more Sinking counts and any amount of Tremor, you get a better version of Deviat Rodion or Sync Mers conditionals, including the ability to use Ego without losing count, with no real restriction past getting Tremor onto the target. Her kit isn't great at applying Tremor, with the rest 2 being the only infliction in her kit, and no other ID you'd run having any, but it's not too hard to reset till you get it, or just pop one of the 50 Ego with Tremor to lead. As for the kit, the S1 and S2 aren't really special. The S1 can be +2, which is pretty nice, while the S2 is 6 potency on a count neutral skill. Again, not bad, although the clashing sucks universally. Even enemies having lowered SP isn't going to guarantee you win her clashes, but it's better for her than it'd be on any other team. The good stuff, however, is in the S3. For some reason, she gets access to a 3-coin skill that, even without its conditionals, sets up a 7-2 stack, and with conditionals, becomes a 6-5 stack that applies 3 Fragile next turn, and has a trivial plus 40% damage conditional. As for her defense and support passive, they're both bizarre and in different ways. Her evade is one of only 2 sources of status protection, has an absurdly high cap, seriously why even bother with an unused that caps at fucking 6 times, and which doesn't do the same thing as normal protection, it's a flat change, not percentage. And the support passive is the most niche thing I can find. It would be good if it's applied to Molar-ish, but what other idea is Tremor sinking? Before you say Sun Shower, not only does he not apply any actual tremor, but the passive also requires head sits. Personally, I hate Molar-ish, but that's far more to do with her miserable early game than any real indictment on her quality. That should be enough stalling though. The ego. 100-footed Death Maggot is an ego that really should do more to differentiate itself. Despite both the name and being in arguably the most coveted spot for an ego, it's so similar to Snag Harpoon that it hurts. That said, it's still a really good ego for Molar. First, it's a 2-coin 3-weight ego for 4 resources, which is already well above the curve, considering that Land of Illusion is 6 resources for a weaker version. Centipede Venom stacks up pretty easily. You'll get 5 stacks minimum from the after attack with pretty much no effort, Tremor on self, then sinking Rupture, Tremor and Venom on the target, and it's not hard to get the full 15 stacks. While the reward isn't great, it is 3 damage and defense level down. The passive is fine. It's way better than Snag Harpoon, given that it does more than make a favoured clash to dominating, but I'm not overly impressed by 3 offense level up a turn. As for the Corrosion, it's just the same ego. You get a single offense level and turn the skill to a negative coin. Why does this exist? Bygone Days is just a really nice healing ego. While it only really works in sinking, it's a great tool for it to have, where it effectively serves as better pursuance. The weight conditionals aren't free, but they're also not too bad to trigger, and while the damage isn't impressive, the on-hits are. +3 count, 2 curse, and effectively 2 turns of fragility on hit are a great start for a 6-cost Teth. And if you have a 4+ Gloom res, that gives you 1 Gloom Fragile that turn, hard to use with Ish's awful speed range, another 10% heal to the 2 lowest allies, and another weight over a generic 4 res. Uninvited also serves as both a source of clash power for Ish, I'll get into panic changing much later, and a way to really speedrun unfocused encounters. There's also her ability to restore 5 SP per turn, which is nice but entirely forgettable. The Corrosion is one of only 2 corrosions that can heal allies, and it's honestly pretty good at it. While it does cost Ish 10% of her max HP, you heal an additional Sinner, don't require 4+ Gloom Rest for the majority of the healing, and get a nice targeting condition that make it one of the only consistent overclocks in the game. Honestly, it's mostly just an upgraded version of the Awakening, with the only downsides being the aforementioned HP drain and dropping 5 offense level compared to the Awakening. You also get Echoes of the Mana, an effect I'm still not going to mention here because I'm a tease like that. For Ish's final sinking ego, I don't care the blind obsession inflicts sinking in the passive, Christmas Nightmare is the only remotely good thing that came out of the blight that is Miracle in District 20. It's a pretty simple design for as text dense as it is. You run it on Zwire Molar-ish, at which point you get some confusing conditions that want enemies that can't act, and then directly reward you for having enemies that aren't in those states, all followed up by a passive that speeds up Ishes and any other self-tremor IDs ramp up. It's less useful as a support piece, given the 2 times per turn restriction, but that's more than enough for Molar to get access to a full power S3 every time it comes around. One last time, I discussed a niche Corrosion, and it's an odd beast indeed. 3 coins, 5 weight, and a reasonable 20 base power is a fine trade for the 11 resources this costs, considering it sets up a Tremor stack for Molar-ish, and against actionable targets also applies a 5-2 sinking stack. The problem is that against those same targets, it's elite 4 of the 5 Tremor count it applies, for a grand total of 4 irrelevant Tremor bursts. Maybe when we get Tremor sobbing I'll be proven wrong, but till then this is probably the weakest of her sinking ego. Still better than her brother He's here. Man, Daichi Rodion. I have no clue if anyone else remembers, but there was a time when this was the strongest ID in the game. Absurd HP, defense level and shield gain, a passive that removes negative effects and gives her free damage up, a single stagger threshold which she can lower with her S1, discard to cycle back to her better skills faster, and the second highest coin spread in the game. It's not like she had any trade-offs either, her skills clashed average at base and had pretty good conditions for the time. Hell, her S1 could roll up to a 15 and to top it all off, she had access to Rhyme Shank. It's also quaint now. She's still good, it's hard for power creep to directly nerf something, but she's no longer worth splashing anywhere, though really no ideas. And even in sinking she's been replaced. I really wish I had more to say here, but I've said all there really is about her. Rhymeshank deserves a mention though, as the progenitor of 8 resource ego that sustain an entire archetype. If I need to explain why a 5/5 stack on a 3-weight ego is good, I'd be disappointed, so just take my word that it is. The other 2 effects are pretty minor, but hey, neither hurts to have. The passive and corrosion both warrant mentions as well, though I can't help but feel people often overstate the value of both. A 10/8 stack sounds great, but it's pretty damn expensive at 13 total resources, and rolls quite a bit less off of the SP costs and just having a lower ceiling. It's good, but Daichi probably shouldn't be using it. The passive is just a good buff, but one that you couldn't really access for a long time, given that even with Rhyme, Sinking still struggled to sustain even a 5 potency stack. From 1 Daichi ID to 2 more, it's Daichi E, easily the least relevant Sinking ID we've ever gotten. People often describe double O's as weaker versions of triple O's, but few are quite as blatant as Daichi E. Just look at these effects compared to Rodion. You get a skill 1 that lowers stagger thresholds, though less than Rodion, an S2 that inflicts sinking potency and eats count, though less than Rodion, and a 4-coin, blunt, sloth, skill 3 that's your only source of count, though less than Rodion. All E has going for him is discard on the S1 and a passive that's as unclear and worthless as possible. Why would you ever run this ID? It's a small mercy that Daichi Honglu is an entirely different ID, and a good one at that. He's definitely on the weaker side of the current sinking team, but considering the absurd things newer sinking IDs get to do, that's not saying much. His clashing is pretty bad, given that his only coin and clash bar conditionals are insight based, but you're probably aware of the trick to using him. If you are, feel free to skip the next 30 seconds or so. Simply put, Hong really wants to stay at 3 insight, and unlike the other 3 Daichi IDs, his reward for each individual discard is pretty low. As such, all you really need to do is play him like any other ID till you see his S3, then use any of his other skills to ensure you discard it, and for the rest of the fight, leave his bottom slots with a defense skill or ego, while only using the skill in the top slot, which will prevent him discarding again and lock him at 3 insight. This isn't a perfect solution, of course. While his S1 is a pretty good tool, relatively speaking, and his S3 is similarly good, his S2 is dire. Eating 3 count for 4 potency isn't a great trade, and using the trick will force you to use the S2 whenever it comes up. This requires you to make a choice, mostly regarding how much you value 1 coin or clash power. If you want to maximise damage, the trick is still worth it, but if you want to keep the stack up, it'll often be right to use his bottom slot skill, dropping your insight but letting you maintain count. His passive can let him gain insight even when not discarding himself, but you'll only be running at most 1 other ID that can discard these days, and even then it's inconsistent. Land of Illusion is his only sinking ego, and it's not a very notable one. It's pretty damn cheap given that 5 of the 6 cost is Gloom, but it also doesn't actually do much of anything. The best use case is setting up for some obscene ego spam turn as a follow-up, which seems like overkill in most fights given that you have that many resources. 2 SP saved per sinner is nothing, or as a free 3-weight skill to use in place of the S2, which isn't bad, but also isn't much. There's worse options for Zions, honestly, it's just nothing special. Finally, we arrive at sinking season with Butler Autis. For some reason, despite being an ID released in 2024, she doesn't have any double coin power conditionals, which for some reason was a recurring theme for the whole fucking season. In a less scathing note, she genuinely is far better than her numbers and infliction imply, and it's all thanks to one little debuff. Echoes of the Mana, finally going to bring it up, is an absolute godsend of a debuff, especially for a status that struggles with sustain like sinking. The whole panic change thing is a complete joke given that every single focused encounter boss with SP is immune to it, but the alternate effect of minus 10% heads odds is relevant given that it makes anyone at negative 40 and below incapable of flipping heads. Of course, that's nothing compared to Echoes causing half of all sinking infliction, potency or count, to also inflict 1 count. While not enough to make Autis even remotely count positive, it's the price you have to pay for an effect like that. Her passive is also pretty good, though it being res hurts, as per usual with 90% of res passives. Now, for the gimmick I mentioned with Isang's Bygone Day, I don't expect anyone who's not been told this already, or tried syncing themselves to know this, but that first line? Each point of syncing it applies is done separately, and as such, each flips the 50-50 for one count separately. Even assuming a conservative 4 Gloom res, you'll still average out getting 6 free count if the target has echoes, which is so far above the usual rate that it can easily sustain you for multiple turns. Considering it's a Zion, and one with a low cost at that, you can easily throw this out every turn that the target has echoes, all while staying SP positive. Getting back to the journey, and her kit is pretty middling. A 14-20-21 that requires a 3 Gloom res passive, along with 7 sinking, and the target being below 0 SP, is just not up to par, and not helped by her lower offense level, not gaining clash power against Abnos, and feeling balanced around the 3 offense level from her passive. What is it with Outer's IDs having that issue? Well, she does have 2 ego that use the word sinking. One is Sun Shower, which I've already mentioned. If you have some source to get the 3 count from critting consistently, please tell me how. Holiday also exists. Unfortunately, I have to bring up more double O's, if only for completeness' sake. So Butler Faust. She's honestly not that bad, at least relative to Butler Autis. Really, she's just another example as to why double O's were a mistake, given that if she had Autis' numbers, she'd honestly be a better ID. Assuming conditionals, she's got a 13-17-20, whereas Autis has a 13-19-20, except Autis also has a bonus clash power in her passive, and a bonus echoes on her S3. If you really want to run Faust, for whatever of the usual reasons, feel free. Again, you're not losing that much. Her support passive was a nice tool to have, but a certain negative coin ID made it not worth bringing her as a backup ID these days. Time for more Gregor slander. Okay, not quite. This was, and I think this will be my first non-controversial statement about Gregor, his first good ID. Don't say Rose Spanner, that was AEDD, not the ID itself. As for Family Heir, he's got some issues, but also some legitimately good tools. First, his rolls are all on par, 11, 16, 16 bases, coin power conditionals on the S1 and S2, and an S3 that takes after Lee Wish. Although the far less egregious coin power conditional, none of this should be impressive, and the same is true of his infliction. His S1 is mostly irrelevant, his S2 is actually good, and his S3 could really do with pretty much any other condition here. Also, would it have hurt to give it a coin or even a base power conditional instead of 3 fucking clash power? His evade is entirely standard, although it keeps up the trend of not giving more than 1 coin power to anything but single coin skills, and the passive is odd. He only has SP loss from absorbing, sinking, and then getting hit. It's so rarely relevant that I don't understand the point of it being a res passive. I swear, everywhere I go I see her face. If you're running a Gregor ID in sinking, this will be the one you run, and he's thankfully got some good ego options. That said, his support passive will be brought up again later. Bygone Day Gregor is probably the weakest of the 3 options. That said, compared to most cases of multiple sinners getting ego from the same Abno, Bygone is easily in the top 3 for winning that exchange. This is one of the uncommon ego. His corrosion is A, entirely different from its awakening, and B, still relevant. So this might take a while. For some reason, it's the only version of Bygone to lack weight, not even having it in the corrosion, but also being by far the most limited. It's an SP generator, but not a particularly notable one. You get 15 of the 20 SP costs on Gregor refunded, another 15 to 2 additional allies, and then E3 sinking count to restore up to 20 more SP to those allies. There are positions where this is a meaningful buff, but even there, 3 count is a lot to remove, especially on an ego that doesn't ever inflict sinking on the main target. Speaking of, on kill, you get 3 sinking and a curse on 3 random enemies. Again, it's not a bad effect, but if you want to spread out curse like that, Ishmael can do a far better job. As for the corrosion, it's limited in what fight it does anything for, mostly due to random targeting and, as said earlier, 1 weight. Given Greg's high natural speeds, along with his access to haste, it's not too hard to get the full 4 Gloom Fragility, helped by setting up 3 sinking count and 3 curse. The damage conditional is a pain, but not all that impressive, but can do work on occasion. The passive is nice, but once again it's limited. At its best, it's on par with Contempt Or's passive, allowing you to generate things like Gluttony, which sinking is always short on, but it requiring a kill makes it tough, and requiring kills at enemies with high sinking for more than one resource is just not something you'll get with anything resembling consistency. Gregor's version of Christmas Nightmare bears mentioning, but only so I can mock it. Unlike Ish's, it's not exactly designed to synergise with any of Greg's ideas, instead being focused on Greg being at full health, which is a bizarre condition to staple to a sinner who's most notable for having passives that heal other IDs. It's an expensive one too, costing 2 Gluttony, and then does nothing if the target doesn't have panic, stagger or low morale. I hate Christmas events so much. The corrosion is even worse, and the passive is dire. Just ignore this one, mostly because Gregor has a good sinking he available. Solemn Lament is honestly a rarity for Gregor. He got an upgraded version of something else. This ego is honestly cracked, and maybe the best sinking ego. The Awakening and Corrosion both need a mention, given they do completely different jobs, so as always, I'll lead with the standard. A 14 roll, 3 coin, unfocused volley ego might seem dreadful, and I won't deny that it struggles to clash. That said, it's far better than that. Firstly, it's got a fairly simple set of on-hits. You get Butterfly, then spend SP to loot the last coin, till you either get 8 total hits or hit 0 sanity. The whole thing tends to absolutely demolish enemy SP and HP, especially considering that each Butterfly hit lets you roll for sinking cap from echoes. Now, spending all that SP just to throw out damage at up to 3 enemies might not seem worth it, but bear in mind that you get back the majority of your spent SP, and Air Greg also gets damage up and fragile if you trigger the passive next turn, based on SP differences. Oh, and most of that SP lost will be made up for by Butterfly. Honestly, there's a reasonable shot you gain SP off of it. The passive is a letdown, but they can't all be winners. Speaking of, people really have to consider this corrosion more, man. It's shockingly good, even in comparison to the Cracked Awakening. Instead of a single target nuke, you get a 5 weight that absolutely slaughters things like Envy, Bicatula or the Time Ripper. You get a 5/5 butterfly stack on all targets, 3 sinking count, a trivial damage conditional, and a final one hit that's a bit too limited to really be noticeable, but hey, damage is damage. Obviously it's not as flashy as the Awakening, given it doesn't get anything from Air's plus coin boost, and it's worthless against single targets, but there are fights where you want 5 weight. Getting back to double O's, and it's at least one that's unique, so that's nice. Maidish isn't a good ID, mind. She doesn't really do anything on any team, and has some pretty dire issues, but I'll take bad double O over a boring one any day. 11, 14, 13 bases aren't great, but her coin power conditionals are some of the easiest in the game, letting her sit at standard 13, 16, 16 numbers. This is unimpressive, but it's frankly just a season 1 ID at that point. As for Infliction, and the passive, because it's pretty connected, it's bad. Her poise gain, which she needs to have anything resembling decent on hit effects, is slow, and far too minimal to make enough of a dent. As for sinking, all her skills are negative, the exception being the neutral S3. Ring IDs still won't be mentioned here. Isang and Autis both have far more important jobs on this team, so Daichi Mer, the only triple O to be overshadowed by an ego on their banner, even with a status that Ryoshi lacks an ID for, I will still mention Contempt Or. I don't understand how they made a leader ID this fucking scuffed right after BL Mer. His S1 is bad, and his only source of guaranteed sinking count. His S2 is standard, and has awful effects. And the S3 is a gimmick that applies a random spread of potency and count for no discernible reason. He had some niche use back in the before times, mostly due to his passive and having Gluttony when you ran Daichi Rodion, but nowadays what's the payoff? Daichi Hong doesn't discard much, which makes Mer's passive worse at ramping himself, which means his S3 gets weaker, and round we go. If you really want Gluttony access, go for it, but he's not a great option. Oh, and Mer is one of 2 sinners without a sinking ego, so that saves me time. All that said though, regret does exist. Okay, here's another big ID, and our first ID with double coin power conditionals. Somehow sinking didn't get them universally, till the game was 18 months old. Wild Hunt is an interesting ID, in that he wasn't really a solution to sinking's problems, and has by far the least relevant leader effect of any ID. Though as you're probably aware, when I start with negatives, there's usually a however. First, his roles are somewhat lopsided. His S1 has the slightly uncommon double coin power and single clash power conditional that W Outis started a month before him, but his S2 loses a coin power for a base power and doesn't get the same clash power conditional. The S3 is honestly great, having a rare quad coin power conditional and being a pretty hefty chunk of sinking count, but you genuinely might not know that, because he only uses it when not on the horse. Speaking of which, Dullahan is honestly a pretty awful buff. Gaining 3 offense level at the cost of 3 defense level is fine, but not all that impressive, especially when plenty of IDs get it for free. The speed boost is identical to 1 haste. Is there any effect outside of ego gifts where the difference matters? The real issue, however, is the SP drain. Even best case, it's taking 10 SP from Heath a turn, and the major payoff for Dullahan doesn't do anything if you're at less than 15 SP, so you absolutely do not want Dullahan early. As for accessing the horse, it's off the counter, the first clashable counter we ever got. It's clearly a prototype of the system, given it's just an upgrade over the S1, assuming you have SP4 horse. As for infliction, it's mostly potency, with the only count positive skill being the S3 1, but he's got enough payoff to be worth running. That said though, he's genuinely on thin ice. Sinking can't sustain more than 1 idea like this, so a better sinking payoff would actually replace him. The main thing to note here is Impending Ruin, which is just a watered down echoes, replacing the important effect with 2 guaranteed count on the S3-1, but it also stacks with echoes, it's not like it's a replacement. Oh yeah, and the S2 has weight, but accessing that weight, it requires Coffin. Coffin is gained off of each kill Heath gets, 1 per, and even more for the S3s. Coffin will tend to stack up faster than you'd expect, but again I have to wait to bring that up. Do you see why this idea is annoying to discuss? He's easy enough to use, but every part of his kit is interlinked with some other gimmick he's got, all of which are in different spots to bring up. Back to Coffin, it's not just a counter for his attack weight. Each stack of Coffin gives some buffs, ranging from straight damage up to minimum speed boosts, and even unconditional clash power. As for losing Coffin, it's only lost on ally deaths. You'll spend 2 Coffin then to bring the ID back for a turn, give them some minor buffs, and more if they're a Canto 6 ID. I'd go into more detail, but I've literally never had this passive trigger. Finally, I'll bring up his most well-known gimmick. While on Dullahan, and at 15 or more SP, his counter turns to his S3-2. It's a great tool, and getting access to it every 2 turns is great. You get an unconditional 31 on 2 negative coins, not quite as bad as it was for Sun Shower, net neutrals for thinking counts, a pile of damage conditionals, up to 240%, and then followed up by gain 2 Coffin and refunding the vast majority of your SP. Honestly, it's probably the second best alternate skill 3 called by a clashable counter on an ID with 2 passives in the game. Cutting to ego, and there's only one I'm mentioning because these 2 are utter garbage. Binds is at its best on Wild Hunt, and another source of Tremor sinking synergy, but mostly relevant for the after attacks and the passive. Starting with the Awakening, it's a somewhat expensive ego, but it's a huge high roll, and one that sets up an obscene buff for next turn. The on-hits are mostly irrelevant, but it's overshadowed by Before the King in Binds. Sure, it got nerfed, so it's not technically attack weight, but having extra damage is nice, even if those extra hits don't trigger on hit effects, or get boosted by damage up. The only upside it really has over just being weight is not triggering enemy defense skills, but that's mostly cope. Ah well, still a great buff. The passive is nice, but inconsistent. Getting a 4+ resonance with him as part isn't free, and to really get a major boost requires it being an A-res. It might sound like I'm down on this ego, but honestly it's still a good option. It just lacks any of the absurd gimmicks other ego have, and is one of the singularly most expensive ego available. And if you really want to spend resources, you have the Overclock. Now, it might look like this is a straight up downgrade, given the 53 SP cost, 17 resource cost, and no real buffs to the on-hits, all tied up with 20 bind to allies, but that's the thing. The bind is the real payoff. If Sinners tie for speed, they'll act in deployment order, meaning that Bind's Overclocked is the best piece of speed control you can possibly get. 3 bind brings most enemies down to 1 speed, and that means you can ensure that all your IDs act in the exact order you want. Does this matter? For pretty much everyone watching this, no. It only really comes up for getting theoretical max damage turns, but hey, it's interesting, right? Now, Sinking goes a long while without new content, but that's the standard for any team after their season, so that means after this one I can go a few months without Rupture. Reindeer Hong will be getting a brief mention, but bear in mind he, much like Reindeer-ish, is just outclassed by the dedicated sinking ID. That said, if we ever had a reason to run sinking charge, we do have a lot of IDs for it. Hong's best trait is, honestly, having a gluttony S1. Somehow I'm incapable of making a team where gluttony isn't a bottleneck. Getting into specifics, we have normal rolls, slow double coin conditionals, and an ID that's tailor-made for inflicting potency. Good when on a team without much real care for sinking, bad when you actually want to sustain a stack. His S2 is awful outside of MD. I do not know what possessed PM to make a skill indiscriminate for the majority of the ID's uptime, as though unfocused volley wasn't enough of an issue, but I digress. His S3 is legitimately good, given that it's one of the best skills in the game for setting up a stack, but with there being a one coin that's majorly positive on count and potency. That all said, gluttony isn't a major resource for sinking, and he just serves as a weaker version of Daichi Hong. Unless you have some tech to exclusively get his S3, just run the older ID. Finally, we arrive at the last two sinking IDs, one mostly irrelevant, and then the ID that I'll probably spend as much time as possible talking about, so why not start with the easy one. Magical Girl Dawn is, as should be obvious, not really relevant outside of charge, given that she can't stay in one mode for any appreciable length, and neither is at all count positive. That makes her place as anything more than a backup ID debatable. Her rolls are fine. Positive or negative, she has fairly standard rolls. Honestly, if the next ID was slightly more restrained, people would be all over her. As for ego, she's got nothing majorly relevant. Fluid Sac is great, being somehow another tremor sinking ego. It's got one of the best corrosions in the game, but is far too expensive to warrant splashing for it. Love and Hate is a sinking ego when overclocked, but it's just not at all a good source. Getting an almost guaranteed corrosion for 18 resources, all for the dream of a 4-1 stack, is hardly impressive, more so when it's also a 2-coin skill. I really wish I hated Despair Rodion. I really wish I even disliked her. I enjoyed playing Daichi Rodion, trying to work out if I should play defensively or not, and when I should use Rhyme Shank, so having her replaced by an ID with this bull-headed design was infuriating. And then I used her. Having two separate IDs in one, with the ability to switch between at will, is fun. Even if one is almost always better, I enjoy trying to choose when to focus on setting up a sinking stack, and when I need to dump all her stacks of Tear Sharpen to maximise damage and defence. Her rolls in negative mode are all absurd. Even if she completely lacks her Tear Sharpen stacks, somehow, she has rolls that never even dip to standard, instead having good rolls by base, and then getting up to 5 offense level, 3 Pierce power up, 2 if you want to sustain it, a final power, and then effectively 4 to 5 damage up between Tear Sharpen and her passive. Her sinking count infliction is also great. While it's impossible to get the listed max values without double slotting a counter or corroding, plus 5 count per turn is entirely reasonable to achieve, despite being an entirely unreasonable amount of infliction. Her potency is no slouch either, with her applying 5 per turn just off of being at neg 40, and all of her skills, including the game's best clashable counter, applying entirely standard amounts of sinking. As if that wasn't enough, her S2 and 3 both apply substantial counts, making her even more positive, and while not majorly relevant, she also gains negative aggro. In positive form, she does give up a good chunk of those upsides. Her rolls are normal, she lacks double coin conditionals, she lacks the absurd count infliction, and she might even, on occasion, lack her max amount of unique charge. Instead, she gets some of the best sinking potency infliction in the game, becomes the most durable ID without ego, and makes several unbreakable coin nuisances incapable of playing the game. That said, Echoes won't help with either Blessing or Despair, it only triggers from a skill, not passives or status effects. While her positive form might seem weaker, because it is, compared to her Despair form it's hardly bad. Being at plus 10 defense level with an effective 4 protection makes it a nightmare for anything but Bleed and Rupture to actually hurt her, and she has plenty of sources of ego to restore her HP. Of her 8 available ego, 5 have some way to heal her. Now, as for that ego, it's mostly Rhyme Shank, which you already heard me wittering about before, but Despair Rodion does get better utility from all her ego. Spending SP helps her stay in negative, and her high count application makes sustaining Rhyme's passive far easier. Because I forgot to mention it earlier, Air Greg support passive has some notable uses with Despair Rodion. Not only does it help her stick to -40, it also gives her a relevant buff, allows you to have a good idea as a sin at 8 for chain battles, and has no risk of corroding her. It's a nice buff to have, but only while Roger is your lowest SPID. If she dies, Greg becomes a liability. As for the team, there's some interesting options here. There's a clear base team: Isang, Heath, Rodya, Autis, Ishmael, and then either Greg or Hong. The thing is that Sinking has 4 separate sinners who gain notably from dual slotting, and while 2 of these are either cope or mostly a waste, these 2 actually do warrant it. Isang lets you stack up Butterfly even faster, helping a lot against enemies with SP who take notable gloom damage. Cassetti, Elking, Heath and Catherine, Jaron, and not really suffering from issues with ammo given he reloads from his S2 and 3, whereas Heath lets you get more S2 access for multi-part fights, and can give you turns with 2 S32s. Roger has some limited use cases for dual slotting, as does Ish, but both would be on the scope of a general guide like this. And as for playing the team, it's not too hard. Roger always wants to guard turn 1, while E never wants to guard if at all possible. Losing SP on it is a big ask. Heath only wants to counter once he's at 30ish SP, so that he can actually get the counter to proc his S3 too, and the other IDs don't care about their defense skills one way or the other. Ish needs her passive, so try to save her S2 until you get the required pride, and pay attention to clash win effects. You have a lot, and most inflict sinking count. Solomon doesn't want to get Gloom Res on his S2 early, and finally, if you're up against someone with obscene Gloom resistance, consider just not running sinking. Now, because it's a bit more relevant this time than in the burn vid, sharding priority. Sinking is honestly a great choice for a team. All the IDs are available, barring 2 Warp IDs that have replacements. It's a good team for pretty much all content, with only 1 notably difficult fight. It's got options for lower sinner content, and it's not completely automatic, so you actually get to play the game. So, obviously, you want the 2 Warp IDs first, then Wild Hunt and Butler Autis, Molarish, and then the remainder can be done in any order. If you're missing those, you can easily replace them or just dual slot. I think that should be everything. As always, team code in the pinned comment, and next one is Tremor. That might be a bit late though. I want to get a guide out for the AK Ego, given that that's going to be limited, and I want you all to know which ones are worth getting. That said, have a good one, and hope you enjoyed it.